Hello everybody. So I thought I'd change it up a bit, and today in episode 7 we're talking about writing action scenes. So I've set myself the challenge of being active whilst writing or telling you about action. So here I am. I'll see how many kilometers I can do on my machine here. I've set it back to 0, so off we go. So first of all, managing action. Now, similar to writing emotional scenes, action is about controlling the amount of information on the page because it can trip over itself. And I thought I would talk about how other people have written action first, thinking about some of the best practitioners, and then perhaps give some tips from my own writing for what it's worth. So I think the way we read action has changed a lot since the advent of film. So I'm going to first of all go to people before the advent of film, so that's pre-20th century. And the kind of places that writers would have looked to compare for action would be something like the stage. So if you think about how Shakespeare writes action scenes, he would have done lots of quick running scenes for battles. He wasn't able to have sets and masses of extras. So he gets by using the power of words to evoke, but also a sort of faster pace, and then the sort of one-on-one action. So for big scenes, you've got people running across stage and horns blaring, and then for sort of key moments, he's got two people fighting, or somebody like in Richard III, somebody being unhorsed, something which focuses down to an individual. And I suppose that's the kind of thing which we're used to see in film as well, so it's probably where it came from in film. But I was thinking about who does action best in terms of novels, away from the stage, and I'm thinking the best person I could think of pre-20th century is Tolstoy. Now bear with me, I don't know how many Russian novels you've got to yet, but I have one here that I think is well worth thinking about. War and Peace, as you probably know, is obviously about war, and I do think that one of the joys of reading the book, if you don't try and read it too quickly, think of it more like a boxed set that you take your time with, is reading some of the scenes of war under Napoleon. And halfway through the first volume of my Penguin edition here is one of the key battles in the Napoleonic War. And how it's written is completely brilliant. And I think it taught me that Tolstoy knew about camera angles before cameras were invented, because it starts up on a hill overlooking the battle scene, with Napoleon looking down on what was going to happen. So you've got a sense of the landscape laid about, so you can see where the battle's going to happen. Then it goes to the Russian commander, Kutuzov. Then it goes down to Prince Andrei, who is our sort of hero figure who is going to take us through this battle. And you get closer and closer and closer, and then you see the battle, the confusion of it from Prince Andrei's point of view, until the point where Andrei is potentially fatally wounded. And it sort of enters into this really beautiful evocation of what it's like to lose consciousness, really. And so it goes, it hurt a little, but the worst of it was that the pain distracted his attention and prevented him from seeing what he was looking at, so his losing consciousness. What's this? Am I falling? My legs are giving away, he thought, and fell on his back. He opened his eyes, hoping to see how the struggle between the Frenchmen and the gunners ended, and anxious to know whether the red-haired artilleryman was killed or not, whether the cannon had been captured or saved. But he saw nothing. Above him there was now only the sky, the lofty sky, not clear yet still immeasurably lofty, with grey clouds creeping softly across it. How quiet, peaceful and solemn, quite different from when I was running. And the rest of the paragraph takes us out of consciousness. So you've got this beautifully orchestrated passage that goes from Napoleon up on the hill, the mass ranks, the Russian commander, down to the individual who's watching one small confrontation within the mass battle, to his own sort of fall. Brilliantly done. I do recommend it to you. In this Penguin edition, which is a translation by, let me quickly check, Rosemary Edmonds. I'm looking at page 326. So if you want to see a master at work to do very big action scenes, I recommend Tolstoy. And that's allowed by his narratorial stance, because he, as a narrator, is picturing himself being sort of over everything. He's able to come down and focus on an individual and move back out again. That's his choice. But mostly, most of us write, well, this is a broad generalisation, but a lot of novels are either in close third person, where it's from the point of view of a single character, or first person or something like that. So you have to check that how you do the action fits the narratorial stance that you already have chosen when you started writing. Okay, so not all action obviously is great big battle scenes, and I was thinking of what I read recently which was impressive in the way it handled action. So another novel, can I carry on? Can I reach? Yeah, I read recently is by a modern novelist called Essie Edukian, which is a fantastic book called Washington Black. It's about a sort of scientific former slave and his adventures. He goes off in an air balloon with his sort of master figure. And at the beginning of part 2, they get hit by a storm. And I was looking at how he did action here. And so he uses a mixture of brief descriptions of the storm moving in, strong language, so you can imagine the noise is coming up, so the language becomes more active so it can be heard over the storm. So one sentence reads, Titch, who's the master figure, Titch hurled himself across the cloud cutter and, fumbling with the ballast, hollered at me in the darkness. Hollered. That word is like a shout, and the language is all sort of exclamations. We must go up. It will not do, Wash. It will not do. So you can see how you punctuate the action with these shouts to force their way through. So if you want to have a look at a sort of natural disaster, you might want to have a look at Washington Black. Very good novel for reading for many reasons. Okay, so what can I take as a lesson from my own writing? Well, the one where I set myself the biggest challenge was when I wrote about the Battle of the Somme in my Eve Edwards book, Dusk. This series is 2 parts. Dusk is the first part of the First World War, and then Dawn is the second part of the First World War. And I covered the Battle of the Somme from the point of view of Sebastian, who's the hero, who's right on the front line, and Helen, who's the female character, who's at one of the nursing stations further back, one of the medical stations. When you're dealing with the First World War, one of the problems is the scope. It's vast, and I don't have the kind of Tolstoy grasp of it. So I decided to research the experience of an individual soldier from the records and then choose his position on the front line. So that's what I did. But I also wanted to filter it through the experience of my character, who is a artist. So he is allowed to have moments where his own character comes through. So this is just as they go over the top. Captain Williams strode down the trench, tapping the men on the shoulder as he passed. This is it, 0 hour. Time, gentlemen. He nodded to Sebastian and then took his position at the centre of their line. Bloody hell, muttered Cook, but he was the first up the fire step and onto the scaling ladder that had leaned against the wall of the trench. He slithered over the top on his belly. Sebastian followed, keeping low as the Cockney had done. The decision to go over was easy now, when he had men looking to him to lead. His first thought as he reached ground level was that the watery morning light seemed so much brighter out here, even though it was filtered through the smoke clouds. He had a flash of memory. Washing brushes, watercolours swirling through a jar in curling formations as he changed colour from pale blue to green. So that's like a slow build-up. I didn't go immediately into action, though that might be called for in some circumstances. And then it gets more frightening. He stumbled forward a few paces, taking cover behind a slight swell of earth, the remains of an old wall. The sheer amount of metal in the sky was terrifying, like a swarm of bee bullets, the noise unimaginable. And then I mean, you've probably seen pictures of this, but I was trying to imagine it from an artist's point of view. And you want to get across the brutality of what they're going through. So I got this through by, I'm afraid, one of the characters dying. Whitworth gave a shrill laugh, getting the nursery book reference. They've been talking about how it's like being caught in Peter Rabbit's net. Love that story, sir. The sound was cut off abruptly as he grasped his throat, blood welling through his fingers, a look of astonishment on his face. He fell against Norton. They had barely advanced 50 yards. So that's more of a narratorial point coming in there, but the character dies as swiftly as the bullet arrives. Anyway, so it goes on. I suppose in the case of a war, it's and the advance in a war, it does take some time. It's much harder to write something like the individual blows in a sword fight, because that is a much swifter thing and requires a definite skill to writing that. I don't know that I've got that skill. Something I'll have to look through my works if I've ever done well. I may have done it badly, you never know. But if you've got ideas of who does that kind of very, like a swift car crash of a fight, it'd be interesting to hear your comments on that. So the way that I did it's obviously the Battle of the Somme is the central thing of the book, but I thought about it in terms of orchestrating it. There's the massing, there's the stillness before they go over the top, there's the confusion, because when you're seeing the battle from the point of view of somebody in it, they've no idea what's going on. And then there's the aftermath, the coming out of it, the unwinding. And often I would use cuts. This is where I think I've been influenced by film. So there'll be moments where you flash back, there are moments where something stops abruptly to make sure you've got maximum impact. You don't tell everything, you select. So there are many ways of writing action. I was thinking about other people who do great war scenes, and I was remembering that in Tolkien, in The Return of the King, he actually chooses to do it via a song. He says, oh yes, the singers sang songs about this for years after. And so he gets around the problem of managing the Battle of Pelennor by having a song to express its vastness. Have a look at that. There's a mixture of action as well, of course. And the BBC adaptation, the one they did with actors acting out Lord of the Rings, they used that song to punctuate the scenes. So you can see how it then would be used as a sort of screenwriter's, or in that case a radio playwriter's, punctuation points in how a big battle develops. Right, so how far have I gone? Let me give you the verdict. Are you ready? So this has been over 3 kilometres of action. So I hope you've enjoyed this, and see you tomorrow.